I sat in my office staring at the darkening sky outside the window. The rain drummed softly on the glass, and it was the only sound that seemed to connect me to reality. On the table was the funeral home's business card, a white rectangle with gold embossing that I'd been turning over in my hands for the third hour. Peace and dignity, I read over and over, trying to see if there was a shred of meaning in those words. Jeremy had died 4 days ago. 42 years of life ended on a wet highway, 20 miles outside of St. Cloud, when an 18-wheeler truck failed to slow down. Police said death was instantaneous. I didn't know if that should comfort me. Probably not. Instant death is a comfort to the living, not the dead. My only son. I had built this business for him, spent 30 years turning a small antique furniture store into an empire that stretched from Minneapolis to Chicago. Every decision, every contract, every risky import from Europe was for Jeremy. I wanted to hand him not just money, but a business he could grow, be proud of, pass on to his children. But Jeremy never had children. Valerie always found excuses. Career, bad timing, health problems that were never confirmed by doctors. I realized even then that she didn't want children with my son. Children would mean responsibility, attachment, the need to think about the future, not just her own desires. Valerie preferred to live for today, if that day promised pleasure. I got up from my chair and walked over to the bookcase, where there was a handmade wooden frame photograph of Jeremy, a gift from an Italian craftsman we'd worked with for years. He was about 25 at the time, just out of university and joining the firm. In the picture, he was smiling a wide, sincere smile, the kind I had not seen from him in the last 5 years. He wasn't married to Valerie then, and there was a spark in his eyes that she had gradually extinguished. I'd met her at a company party at the company where Jeremy worked after university. A tall blonde with flawless makeup and a dress that cost more than she made in a month. Even then I was alarmed at how quickly she figured out who I was and what I did. Too many questions about the business for a casual acquaintance, too intense an interest in the family's real estate, too precise inquiries about how long I'd been in business and whether I planned to pass it on to my son. But Jeremy was in love. He spoke of her with such admiration as if he'd discovered the eighth wonder of the world. Valerie knew how to be charming when she needed to be. At family dinners, she marveled at my stories of trips to Italy and France for antiques, asked intelligent questions, laughed in all the right places. She even learned to distinguish between periods of furniture and could support a conversation about Venetian carving or French gilding. And gradually, imperceptibly, she began to distance my son from me. At first, it was little things. "Daddy, we can't come to Sunday lunch. Valerie's meeting with her friends. Daddy, we can't go with you to the exhibit in Chicago. Valerie can't travel well. Dad, maybe next time we can discuss company business. Valerie is tired and I need to be home." Each time Jeremy apologized, each time he promised that next time would be different. But the next time never came. Then the excuses got bolder. Valerie started voicing concerns about my business practices. Too old-fashioned, she told Jeremy. Too much emphasis on quality, not enough on profit. Need to modernize, need to think about the future, need to expand faster. She suggested buying cheap fakes from Asia instead of real antiques, opening a chain of stores instead of one quality showroom. And my son started repeating her words as if they were his own thoughts. I poured myself a whiskey and returned to the table. The amber liquid in the glass reflected the light of the desk lamp, reminding me of sunny days in Tuscany, where I'd found the best pieces of furniture for the collection. An unfinished table glowed on the computer screen, the latest order from Florence, 18th century walnut carving. Jeremy was supposed to be handling this contract, meeting with the supplier, overseeing delivery. Now someone else would handle it, or no one would. Outside the window, the rain intensified. I listened to the drops dripping down the gutter and remembered how much Jeremy had loved this kind of weather when he was a kid. We sat together in the same study, and I showed him books about the history of furniture, told him about the masters of the past, about how masterpieces that would endure through the ages were made. He listened attentively, asked questions, dreamed of someday traveling to Europe with me. We went when he turned 18, a month in Italy and France, visiting workshops, museums, private collections. Jeremy was thrilled with every day, every encounter. I was sure then that he would continue the business, that we would have a future together. But that was before Valerie. Valerie hasn't called me once since Jeremy died. She took care of all the formalities, made all the decisions without me. It's too hard for you at your age, she said when I tried to participate in the funeral arrangements. 71 is not an age to be scrapped, but Valerie always thought I was too old for anything important. Too old to understand modern business, too old to advise her son, too old to be involved in family decisions. She didn't realize, or didn't want to realize, that I knew her better than she thought I did. I've seen the way she looks at the paintings in the living room, the way she appraises the furniture, the way she asks Jeremy about future plans. I've seen the bills for her purchases that were sometimes casually left on the table at her son's house. Thousands of dollars worth of dresses, jewelry she wore once or twice, trips to beauty salons that cost more than many people spend on food in a month. Jeremy didn't notice anything, or didn't want to notice. Love makes people blind, and my son was no exception. He saw Valerie as the woman he fell in love with, not the woman she really was. He didn't see her going through his credit cards, didn't see her studying the company documents he left at home, didn't see the cold calculation in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. I sipped my whiskey and closed my eyes. Tomorrow is the funeral, and I won't be at it. My only son will be buried without me because his widow decided it was best for everyone. But I already made my decision about the inheritance months ago. Valerie will get exactly what she deserves. Nothing more, nothing less. In the morning, I woke up in a chair in the study. My neck ached from the uncomfortable position, and the empty whiskey glass was a reminder of last night. The October sun was shining outside the window, breaking through the clouds that hadn't cleared after the night's rain. I looked at the clock. It was 9:30 in the morning. The funeral was 4 hours away. I got up, stretched my stiff shoulders, and headed for the bathroom. In the mirror, I was looking at a tired, 71-year-old man with gray hair and deep wrinkles around his eyes. Not an old man, but not the energetic businessman who had started building an antique furniture empire 30 years ago. Time leaves its marks on everyone, but I still felt strong enough to handle what lay ahead. After a shower and breakfast, I sat down at the phone to go over the details of the ceremony. All I knew was the time and place, St. Paul's Church in downtown St. Cloud. Valerie had informed me of it in a short, dry message 2 days ago. No more details, no more questions about what I wanted to say at the ceremony or what flowers I preferred. I dialed Valerie's number, preparing myself for an unpleasant conversation. The beep seemed endless, and I was about to hang up when she finally answered. "Walter?" The voice was cold, almost official. "Valerie, I'd like to discuss some details of the funeral. I need to know, Martin, You don't need to," she interrupted me. "Everything's already been arranged. You don't need to worry." "He's my son," I said, trying to remain calm. "I have the right to—" "Walter," her voice grew even colder. "I realize this is difficult, but the ceremony will be small. Just the closest people. I think it's best if you stay home. At your age, that kind of stress can be dangerous." I felt the blood rush to my face. At my age, she said it as if I were 90, not 71. "Valerie, I am perfectly healthy and I intend to attend the funeral of my only son." "No," she replied simply. "I'm sorry, but it's my decision. Jeremy wouldn't want you to be more upset than necessary." How do you know what Jeremy wanted? I couldn't help myself. He loved me, and I have the right to say goodbye to him. "Son, Walter, don't complicate things. It's already been decided." There was a familiar note of superiority in her voice that I'd heard many times over the years. The call went dead. Valerie hung up without waiting for my response. I sat there, phone in hand, trying to believe what I had just heard. My son is being buried without me. The woman who had only been married to him for 6 years had decided I wasn't worthy to attend his funeral. I remembered the first time I suspected Valerie wasn't who she said she was. It was at Jeremy's birthday party 3 years ago. We were sitting at a table in a restaurant she'd picked out, an expensive, pompous place where every course cost more than the average family dinner. Valerie had ordered the most expensive champagne on the menu without asking anyone's permission. "Jeremy deserves the best," she said when the waiter brought out a $200 bottle. I remained silent then, but I noticed the way she looked at the other diners, judging their outfits, their jewelry, the cars in the parking lot. She was always comparing, always envious, always wanting more. And gradually this desire for more began to affect Jeremy. My son used to settle for simple pleasures. He loved our Sunday strolls to antique stores, could spend hours studying antique furniture, marveling at the craftsmanship of long-dead carvers. After we married, these outings stopped. Valerie considered them boring, old-fashioned, a waste of time. "Dad, we need to think about modernity," Jeremy told me, almost verbatim, echoing his wife's words. "Antiques are good, but people need practical, affordable furniture." I tried to explain to him that our niche is not the mass market, but collectors, connoisseurs, people who are willing to pay for quality and history. But Valerie had already planted in his head ideas of quick profits and business expansion. She dreamed of a chain of stores, of franchises, of turning our family business into a faceless corporation. Jeremy started bringing home catalogs of cheap furniture from China, offering to replace unique Italian dressers with stamped copies. "Look at these numbers, Dad," he said, showing me profit estimates. "We could make 10 times as much." But I didn't want to make 10 times as much selling junk. I'd spent half my life building a reputation, gaining the trust of customers who knew that if they bought from Crosby, they were getting a genuine work of art, not a fake. Valerie didn't understand that. To her, furniture was just a commodity, and reputation was an abstract concept you couldn't put in the bank. She looked at our shop windows and saw only numbers, only the possibility of getting rich quick. I remember the night she came to my house without Jeremy. That was about a year ago. She said she wanted to have a serious talk about the future of the company. "Walter, you're not getting any younger," she said, sitting down in the chair across from my desk. "It's time to think about handing things over to the next generation." I agreed with her. I had indeed planned to gradually hand over management to Jeremy. "But," Valerie continued, "we need to modernize our approach. Today's market requires flexibility, speed, a willingness to change." She laid out a folder of documents in front of me, a business plan she'd drawn up without my knowledge. There were calculations for opening branches in 3 cities, plans for buying cheap furniture, and schemes for rapid expansion. Everything looked professional, convincing, profitable, and completely alien to what I'd been doing all my life. "This is not our way," I told her at the time. "It's the only way if you want the business to survive," she replied. "Jeremy understands that. He's ready for a change." That's when I realized I was losing my son. Valerie had already convinced him of the rightness of her ideas, had already turned him against my outdated principles. Jeremy came to me less and less often, and when he did, he talked about the need for change, about keeping up with the times. Our relationship became strained. We still worked together, but the closeness we had before was gone. Valerie had gotten what she wanted. She had alienated her son from his father by convincing him that I was hindering his success. Now Jeremy's dead, and Valerie won't let me attend his funeral. She's probably already planning how she's going to dispose of the inheritance, how she's going to implement her plans to modernize the business. She thinks she's finally got what she's been striving for all these years. I got up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, people were hurrying about their business, unaware that my son was being buried today. Life went on, indifferent to my grief and to Valerie's meanness. But I had a plan, one I'd started months ago when I realized where things were headed. Valerie would get exactly what she deserved, and soon enough, she would know it. At 12:30, when I knew the ceremony at St. Paul's had already begun, the doorbell rang. I was sitting in my office with a cup of coffee, which had long since cooled, and reading an article about the upcoming antiques auctions in New York. The habit of distracting myself with work in difficult moments had been developed over the years, but today the words were blurring before my eyes, and I couldn't concentrate. The doorbell rang sharply, insistently. 2 short, 1 long, the way it usually rang for people who were in a hurry and not ready to wait. I stood up, adjusted my tie, and headed for the front door. Through the peephole, I saw Valerie in a black dress and a wide-brimmed hat with a veil, and next to her, a middle-aged stranger with a leather briefcase in his hands. Opening the door, I stepped back silently, letting them pass. Valerie entered first without even saying hello, and stopped in the hall, looking around the interior as if she were assessing the value of each item. The stranger followed her, stomping awkwardly on the threshold. "Walter," Valerie said, finally condescending to address him. "This is Mr. Parkinson, the notary. We need to go over some formalities regarding Jeremy's inheritance." I looked at my watch defiantly. "Isn't it a little early for that kind of talk? My son hasn't even been buried yet." Valerie took off his gloves with slow, practiced movements. "That's why we're here. There are some matters that need to be dealt with immediately. Banks, insurance companies, real estate documents. None of this can be left hanging." The notary coughed and stepped forward. "Mr. Crosby, I realize the timing isn't right, but Mrs. Crosby is right. There are certain procedures that need to be followed as soon as possible to avoid legal complications." I invited them into the living room with a gesture. Valerie walked forward without removing her hat and sat in the chair my late wife had once favored. The notary made himself comfortable on the couch, taking a stack of documents out of his briefcase. "Can you offer me something to drink?" Parkinson asked, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "No," Valerie replied sharply. "We won't be staying long." I sat down across from them, crossing my arms over my chest. "So what are we talking about?" Valerie took cigarettes out of her purse and lit one without asking permission. The smoke rose to the ceiling, and I remembered that Jeremy had always asked her not to smoke in the house. Jeremy couldn't ask for anything now. "As you know," the notary began, laying out the papers on the coffee table, "in the event of Jeremy's death, all of his assets pass to his wife according to a will drawn up 3 years ago. However, there are some assets that legally belong to the family business, and this is where your involvement is required." "What assets?" I asked, even though I knew the answer perfectly well. Valerie leaned forward, putting out her cigarette in a vase that stood on the table. I restrained myself from making a remark. "Company shares, real estate, business-related bank accounts," she listed. Jeremy was a co-owner, and now his share belongs to me. But I need documents proving the value of the assets, access to the accounts, all the financial records." The notary nodded. "Mrs. Crosby is entitled to full disclosure of her deceased spouse's assets. This includes all documents pertaining to the business he was involved in." I slowly stood up and walked to the window. Outside the glass, cars were passing by, people were walking on the sidewalks. Life went on as usual. And here in my living room, a scene was playing out that I had envisioned long ago. "Valerie," I said without turning around, "you didn't even wait for the earth to settle on your son's grave." "Don't make a scene," she replied coldly. "This is business, and in business sentimentality is inappropriate. You taught me that yourself." I turned to her. "I taught you that? Of course you did. All these years you've shown that money and property are more important than human relationships. The company was more important to you than your son. Now you're reaping the rewards." The notary is squirming uncomfortably on the couch. "Maybe we should concentrate on the documents. Time is precious, and Mrs. Crosby has a lot to do today." Valerie smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "Exactly. I have an appointment with the bank director in an hour. I need to sort out the company's line of credit, get it all in my name." She spoke as if she already owned everything Jeremy and I had spent years building. She had the confidence of someone who'd gotten what she'd wanted for a long time. "Mr. Crosby," the notary intervened, "you will need to provide the following documents: company and corporation documents, financial statements for the last 5 years, deeds to real estate used for business purposes, and bank statements for corporate accounts." I made my way to the desk in the corner of the living room where I kept duplicates of the most important documents. Valerie scrutinized my every move, not hiding her impatience. "All of these are in the company office," I said, pulling a folder out of a drawer, "but I can give you some of it now." "Great," Valerie said with almost undisguised relief. "The sooner we get the formalities out of the way, the better for everyone." I handed the notary a few documents. Parkinson looked them over quickly, jotted something down in his notebook. "This will help start the procedure," he said, "but I'll still need full financial statements and documents on all the company's assets." "Of course," I agreed. "I'll deliver everything I need tomorrow." Valerie stood up, adjusting the folds of her black dress. "Walter, I want you to understand that I'm not going to make any unnecessary changes to the company. I just want to make sure everything is legally correct." The lie sounded so natural that I almost believed it was sincere. Almost. But I knew Valerie too well to buy that assurance. "I understand," I said calmly. The notary gathered up the documents, tucked them into his briefcase. Mr. Crosby, tomorrow I'll send you a complete list of the required documents. We'll try to resolve all issues as quickly and painlessly as possible. They headed for the exit. Valerie turned around at the door. Hey, Walter, I know we've had our differences, but now we have to think about the future. Jeremy would like us to cooperate. Of course, I replied. Jeremy always wanted there to be peace in the family. She nodded, not noticing the irony in my voice, and walked out. The notary followed her, mumbling something about contacting me tomorrow. I closed the door and leaned my back against it. The house was quiet again. Valerie had gotten what she wanted, at least she thought she had. The documents I had given her were indeed authentic, but they showed the state of affairs as of last year. A lot had changed since then. I went back to my office and sat down at my desk. The computer screen flashed up with the letter from my attorney from last night. It was processed according to my instructions. Valerie would soon learn that receiving an inheritance and handling it were very different things. Valerie got into her red BMW and stood still for a moment, holding onto the steering wheel. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it pounding in the silence of the cabin. It had gone even better than she'd planned. The old man didn't resist, didn't make a scene, didn't try to challenge her rights, just silently handed over the papers like a submissive dog. She took a mirror out of her purse and adjusted her lipstick. Black suited her, emphasizing the pallor of her skin and the expressiveness of her eyes. Jeremy had always said she looked like a movie star in a black dress. Now Jeremy was dead, and she was finally free to live the life she'd always wanted. Valerie started the car and pulled out of the driveway of Walter's house. In the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of the facade of the mansion, a solid, expensive English manor house. Soon this house, too, would be hers. Everything would belong to her. She turned on the music and stepped on the gas. Notary Parkinson followed in his modest Toyota, but Valerie wasn't expecting him. Everything necessary had already been discussed. The paperwork had been received, and the process was underway. Tomorrow she would become the official heiress to one of the most successful antique businesses in the state. On the way downtown, Valerie mentally calculated the numbers. The company was worth at least $5 million, including real estate, inventory, customer base, and reputation. Walter's house was worth another $1.5 million. Jeremy's own house, which they'd bought 3 years ago, was $800,000. Cars, bank accounts, insurance, another $1 million. That's about $8.5 million. $8.5 million. Valerie slowly spoke that amount out loud, savoring every word. No more credit cards with a $5,000 limit, no more sales at the mall, no more looking at price tags before buying. She'd be able to do whatever she wanted. First up was a vacation. A real vacation. Not those measly week-long trips to the lake that Jeremy had arranged. A month in Europe, the best hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants, shopping in Milan and Paris. She had long dreamed of such a vacation, but Jeremy had always found excuses. That the company needed attention, that her father wasn't feeling well, that the economic situation was unstable. Now no one would limit her. Valerie stopped at a stoplight and pulled out her phone. First on her contact list was Michelle, a friend she had met at the fitness club. Michelle was married to a lawyer and was well-versed in probate and family law. "Michelle, it's Valerie," she said when her friend answered. "I have some news." "Oh my goodness, honey, how was the funeral? I was so worried about you." "It went decently," Valerie lied. Jeremy would have been pleased. "But I'm calling about something else. I met with the notary this morning." "Already? But isn't it a little early to be dealing with such matters?" "You can't put off legal formalities these days," Valerie admonished. "And Michelle, you won't believe what it turned out." She paused for effect. "Jeremy left me everything. Absolutely everything. The company, the houses, the bank accounts. I'm a multimillionaire now." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Valerie, it's incredible," Michelle finally exhaled. "How much exactly?" "About $8.5 million. Maybe more when they do a full valuation of the assets." "Oh my God!" Michelle couldn't hide her admiration. "What are you going to do?" The light turned green and Valerie drove on, keeping her phone to her ear. "First, a vacation. A month in Europe at least. Then I'll see what to do with the business. Maybe I'll sell it. Antiques are not my field. I'll use the proceeds to do something more modern. What about Jeremy's father? He was part owner of the company too, wasn't he? Valerie grinned. Walter? He's at the age where he should be thinking about retirement. I think he'd be happy to put the business in younger hands. Besides, legally I own everything now. She didn't tell Michelle how the meeting with the notary had gone, how obediently Walter had handed over the documents without even trying to object. The old man realized that the game was over and surrendered without a fight. Valerie, I'm so happy for you, Michelle said. After everything you've been through with Jeremy, you deserve to be happy. Thank you, darling. I gotta go. I'll see you this weekend. And get ready for some good news. I'm thinking about throwing a big party to celebrate the new life. Valerie disconnected the phone and immediately dialed the number of Cynthia, her colleague at the advertising agency. Cynthia had always been jealous of her marriage to a wealthy heir, and now Valerie couldn't wait to share the news. Cynthia, are you sitting down? She started the conversation. Valerie, how are you, sweetheart? I heard about Jeremy. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, but I'm not calling for condolences. I have news that will change my life forever. She told Cynthia the same story as Michelle, but this time added more details about her plans. Cynthia listened with ill-concealed envy, occasionally egging and oohing. And what are you going to do about work? Cynthia asked at the end of the conversation. Quit, of course, Valerie laughed. Boom, I'll hand in my notice tomorrow. No more client presentations, no more deadlines, no more boss. I'm my own boss now. When she finished talking, Valerie felt a surge of energy. A whole new life full of opportunities and pleasures loomed ahead. She was no longer the wife of a boring antiques dealer who had to pretend to be interested in dusty old furniture. She was a free, wealthy woman of 34 with a whole world of possibilities ahead of her. Valerie turned toward home, the large mansion in the upscale St. Cloud neighborhood that she and Jeremy had bought with his father's money. It was hers alone now. The tall windows, the marble columns, the perfectly mowed lawn. It was no longer the family home. It was her property, her kingdom. She put the car in the garage and walked through the kitchen into the house. Everything here reminded her of Jeremy, his coffee cup in the sink, the newspaper he'd read at breakfast a few days ago, the note reminding her of the dentist appointment. Valerie gathered up all these little things and tossed them in the trash. Time to start a new chapter of life, one without sentimental memories. In the living room, she poured herself a glass of champagne, the expensive French that Jeremy saved for special occasions. Right now was a special occasion. Valerie raised the glass to the light, admiring the play of bubbles, and toasted to herself. To a new life, to freedom, to the riches I've waited so long for. The champagne seemed to her tastier than usual. Everything around her seemed brighter, more pleasant, more promising. Tomorrow a new era in Valerie Crosby's life would begin, and she was ready to enjoy every minute of it. The next morning, Valerie woke up in a wonderful mood. The sunlight was streaming through the white bedroom curtains, and the whole world seemed especially bright and promising to her. She stretched out in bed, enjoying the feeling of absolute freedom. No one around to tell her to get up earlier or plan her day a certain way. After a long shower and thorough makeup, Valerie put on her best business suit, dark gray, emphasizing the slender figure with pearl jewelry, the image of a successful woman who is in control of the situation. That's exactly what she wanted to look like when she met with Hazel Mitchell, her personal attorney. Hazel worked at a small but prestigious law firm in downtown St. Cloud. Valerie had approached him 2 years ago when she had a disagreement with Jeremy over the purchase of a new car. At that time, Hazel helped her get the car loan right so that the primary responsibility rested with her husband. Smart, cynical, and willing to work for good money. Just the kind of lawyer she needed. Hazel's office was on the 4th floor of a modern glass and steel building. Valerie took the elevator, enjoying her reflection in the mirrored walls. Today she looked like $1 million. $8.5 million to be exact. The receptionist, a young girl with a short haircut and huge glasses, looked up from her computer. Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Mitchell is expecting you. Come in, please. Valerie pushed open the office door and entered with a confident smile. Hazel sat behind a massive oak desk piled with documents. He was about 45, his graying hair neatly styled, his expensive suit impeccably ironed. Usually he greeted clients with a professional smile, but today his face expressed some concern. Valerie, He stood up and extended his hand for a handshake. My condolences about Jeremy. Thank you, Hazel. I appreciate your support during this difficult time. She sat down in the leather chair across from his desk, placing her purse on her lap. I trust you received all the documents I sent last night. Copies of the death certificate, the will, the bank statements? Hazel nodded, but his expression didn't change. Yes, I did. Valerie, I need to ask you a few questions before we go any further. Sure, go ahead. The lawyer pulled some sheets out of a folder and spread them out in front of him. Tell me more about the family's financial situation at the time of your husband's death. What were your total assets? What were your liabilities? Valerie was slightly surprised at the direction of the conversation, but answered confidently. Jeremy owned a stake in the family business, an antiques trading company, plus our house, cars, savings. As far as I know, there were no serious debts. And loans, mortgages, car loans, credit cards. Mortgage on the house, of course. A car loan on my car. A few credit cards with small balances. Nothing substantial. Hazel wrote something down in his notebook, then raised his eyes to her. Valerie, I've done a preliminary check of the financial records available through public sources, and I need to discuss some things with you that may affect the inheritance process. What things? There was uncertainty in Valerie's voice for the first time that morning. The lawyer leaned back in his chair, crossing his fingers. Let's start with the loans. According to bank records, there are several large loans in your husband's name that you may not have been aware of. Valerie felt her pulse quicken. What loans? Jeremy never mentioned any large loans. 3 personal loans totaling about $700,000, all made within the last 2 years. And according to the paperwork, the money was spent on... He looked at the paperwork. Luxury purchases, travel, expensive goods. Valerie's heart beat even faster. $700,000. She remembered those loans she'd made them herself, using Jeremy's paperwork. But how did Hazel know such details? Maybe they were business investments, she tried to justify herself, or major purchases for the company. No, Valerie, these are personal loans, unrelated to the business. And more importantly, under the terms of the will and state law, all debts of the deceased pass to the heir along with the assets. Valerie felt her mouth drying up. Hazel, what exactly are you trying to say? The lawyer leaned forward, his voice softer, but his words sounded like a sentence. What I'm saying is that before you can access the inheritance, these debts will have to be dealt with. $700,000 in debt is a serious amount of money that significantly reduces the value of the inheritance. But the assets exceed the debts, Valerie objected. No, the company, the houses, everything else is worth much more. It depends on many factors, Hazel answered cautiously. I need to get complete information about the value of all the assets, and that could take time. He pulled out another document. And there's another problem. I tried to contact the bank that handles the corporate accounts of the antique company to get information about the current state of the assets. But I was informed that there have been some changes in the ownership structure of the company. What kind of changes? Valerie felt her skin grow cold. I can't say for sure yet. The bank officials refused to give details without the relevant documents. But judging from their reaction, the situation isn't as simple as it initially seemed. Valerie got up from her chair and walked over to the window. Down the street, people were walking down the street. Cars were driving. Everything seemed the same as yesterday. But something wasn't starting to go the way she had planned. Hazel, what exactly do you need from me? First, a complete list of all loans and credits that may have been made in the husband's name. I need to know the exact amount owed. Secondly, I need all documents relating to the family business. Incorporation papers, contracts, bank statements. Jeremy's father has the business records. He gave me some copies yesterday. That may not be enough. I need a full picture of the company's financial situation today. Valerie went back to her chair, but she didn't sit down. And as for the debts, Hazel, perhaps there are ways to dispute some of those liabilities or reissue them. The lawyer shook his head. Valerie, if the loans are made legally, with the husband's signature and following all the procedures, it is almost impossible to dispute them. They become part of the inheritance estate. And what if the loans were made without Jeremy's knowledge? If someone used his documents? Hazel looked at her carefully. That's a very serious accusation. If you claim there was fraud, then a police report will have to be filed, an investigation will have to be carried out. It could delay the inheritance process for months or even years. Valerie realized she had backed herself into a corner. A fraud charge would draw too much attention to her own actions. No, of course there was no fraud. I just didn't know about all of my husband's financial transactions. Okay, Then we work with what we have. Valerie, I'm going to be honest with you. It's more complicated than it first appears. I need some time to get to the bottom of it. How much time? A week, maybe two? Depends on how quickly I can get the information I need from banks and other organizations. Valerie nodded, trying not to show her disappointment. A week or two wasn't much, but her plans for a quick inheritance were beginning to crumble. All right, Hazel, do whatever you need to do. I look forward to hearing from you. She picked up her purse and headed for the door. Valerie, the lawyer called out to her, try not to make any major financial decisions until we get the full picture. It's important. She nodded and left the office. In the elevator going downstairs, Valerie stared at her reflection and tried to figure out exactly what had gone wrong. $700,000 in debt was a lot, but not critical. Some changes in the structure of the company, probably the usual bureaucratic formalities. It's going to be okay. It has to be. Valerie hadn't gotten far from Hazel's office before the phone rang. The lawyer's name popped up on the screen, and her heart skipped a beat. Quick calls like this usually meant either very good or very bad news. Valerie, you need to come back immediately. Hazel's voice sounded tense. I have information that needs to be discussed in person. Is something wrong? Just come back. It's important. 20 minutes later, Valerie was sitting in the lawyer's office again. This time, Hazel didn't get up to say hello. He sat at his desk, staring at his computer monitor with the printed documents in front of him. His face was grim. Valerie, I got a response from the bank regarding the corporate accounts of the antique company, he began without preamble, and I had to make some additional inquiries to the state registry of legal entities. And what did you find out? Valerie felt the muscles in her neck tense. Hazel turned the monitor toward her. A page of official documents full of legal terms and stamps was open on the screen. Crosby Antique Furniture, a company in which your husband owned an interest, was reorganized 6 months ago. All of the company's assets, buildings, warehouses, inventory, bank accounts were transferred to the Art Legacy Charitable Foundation. Valerie blinked, not immediately understanding the meaning of what she was hearing. What did transferred mean? It meant the company was no longer owned by the Crosby family. All assets related to the business were now owned by a charitable organization. Legally, your husband no longer had any rights to those assets. But that's impossible. Valerie stood up from her chair. Jeremy would never agree to something like that. This is a family business. According to the documents, the decision was made unanimously by all the members of the company, Walter Crosby and Jeremy Crosby. It's perfectly legal, and it's in accordance with all the procedures. Hazel flipped through several pages. Moreover, the house where Walter Crosby lives was also given to this foundation as a donation. Technically, he remains there as the property manager, but he is no longer the owner. Valerie sank back into her chair, feeling a chill run down her spine. And our house, the house where Jeremy and I lived? Sotrim, your house remains your property for now. But there's another problem. The lawyer pulled out another document. I've obtained details of the loans that were made in your husband's name. As I said, the total amount is about $700,000. But there are nuances in the way these loans were arranged. What nuances? All 3 loans were secured against your family home. That means that if you default, the bank has the right to seize the property to pay off the debt. Valerie felt the ground slipping from under her feet. Hazel, explain to me in simple words what all this means. The lawyer took off his glasses and wiped them, obviously preparing for an unpleasant conversation. It means that your inheritance consists of one house worth about $800,000 and debts of $700,000. So your net profit is about $100,000, assuming you can sell the house at market value and pay off the loans in full. And if I can't make the payments, then the bank will go to court and force you to sell the house at auction. Usually the auction price is lower than the market price, so you could end up with nothing at all. Valerie sat in silence, trying to make sense of what she'd heard. $8.5 million had turned into $100,000, or maybe even zero. Hazel, what about Jeremy's life insurance? He had a $500,000 policy. I checked. The insurance company refuses to pay the claim. Why? Because your husband didn't disclose any major loans on his application. The insurance company considers it a material omission and is canceling the policy. Valerie closed her eyes, trying to focus. Everything was falling apart so fast that she didn't even realize what was happening. Jeremy couldn't have known about the loans, she tried to argue. Maybe someone made them without his knowledge. Hazel looked at her carefully. Valerie, I've seen copies of all the documents. The signatures look genuine. All the procedures have been followed. If you claim that there was fraud, you should go to the police. No, she replied quickly. I'm not alleging anything like that. I'm just trying to understand the situation. She stood up and walked around the office, trying to organize her thoughts. Hazel, is it possible to challenge the transfer of company assets to the charity? Are there any legal loopholes? I've studied the documents very carefully. It's all legally flawless. Moreover, judging by the dates, the decision to reorganize was not taken spontaneously, but was prepared in advance. There are preliminary documents, consultations with lawyers, property valuations. So it was planned? Absolutely. Operations like this don't happen overnight. Valerie stopped at the window looking at the street, where people were hurrying about their business, unaware of the drama playing out in the lawyer's office. So Walter had planned in advance to disinherit me? I can't judge his motives, Hazel replied cautiously. I can only state the facts. The reorganization of the company took place 6 months before your husband's death. Everything was done in accordance with the law. And Jeremy? He must have known about such a major business change. According to the documents, he signed all the necessary paperwork. Valerie felt nausea rise to her throat. Jeremy knew. He knew the company would be donated to a charity, knew she would receive no inheritance, and he kept quiet. All these months, while she planned for the future, while she dreamed of wealth and freedom, he had remained silent. Hazel, what's my next move? Well, first of all, you need to sort out your credit obligations. You have about a month before the banks start demanding explanations for late payments. I recommend putting the house on the market as soon as possible. What if the house doesn't sell quickly? Then you will have to negotiate with the banks to restructure your debt or declare bankruptcy. The word bankruptcy sounded like a sentence. Valerie imagined what her life would look like. A rented apartment, a used car, constant worrying about money. All the things she'd tried to get away from by marrying Jeremy. Is there any way the charity could be compensated? No, the foundation received the assets legally. You have no rights to those assets. Hazel gathered the documents into a folder. Valerie, I'm sorry to have to break this news, but it's better to know the real state of affairs than to build illusions. She nodded, feeling her insides grow cold. Thank you, Hazel, for your honesty. What are you going to do? Valerie picked up her purse and headed for the exit. I don't know yet. I need time to think about it. In the hallway waiting for the elevator, she tried to calculate her resources. She had about $20,000 in her bank accounts. The car was worth $40,000 if she sold it urgently. Jewelry was another $15,000 to $20,000. All in all, about $75,000 against $700,000 in debt. The elevator finally arrived and Valerie stepped inside, feeling as if the whole world was crumbling around her. Yesterday, she had been a wealthy widow with bright prospects. Today, she's nearly bankrupt. And somewhere in her house sits Walter Crosby, probably anticipating her reaction to the news. The phone rang at 4 in the afternoon as I was reading in a chair by the fireplace. After yesterday's meeting with Valerie and her notary, I had expected a call, but thought she would contact me tomorrow or the day after. Apparently, the truth got to her faster than I thought. Walter! Valerie's voice sounded hysterical, almost a scream. What have you done? What have you done to the company? I put the book down and made myself more comfortable in the chair. Good afternoon, Valerie. What are you talking about? Don't pretend, she gasped with rage. I know you've given the whole company to some charitable foundation. I know the house is no longer yours. You stole Jeremy's inheritance. Stole? I couldn't help but chuckle. Valerie, I didn't steal anything. I simply disposed of my property as I saw fit. It wasn't just your property. Jeremy was part owner. Yes, he was, and he agreed with my decision. Did you forget to ask him why he signed all the documents? There was silence on the other end of the line. Valerie was probably trying to digest this information. You made him sign. I didn't force anyone to sign, I said calmly. Jeremy came to me 6 months ago and told me about your loans. $700,000 in his name without his knowledge. He was shocked, Valerie, and very disappointed. Silence again. Longer. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally said, but her voice sounded less confident. About you stealing from my son, taking out loans using his papers, spending money on your own whims. Did you think he'd never find out? Or did you expect him to keep quiet out of love for you? I stood up and walked to the window, watching the neighbor's cat hunt the leaves the wind carried across the yard. Jeremy loved you, Valerie. Even after finding out about your stealing, he didn't want a divorce. But he also knew he couldn't let you destroy what we'd spent a lifetime building. That's not true, she screamed. Jeremy would never agree to disinherit me. He didn't disinherit you. He was disinheriting you to ruin the family business. The house you lived in was still yours, unless, of course, the banks took it away for debt. Valerie started to say something fast, rambling, but I interrupted her. Do you know, Valerie, what was the most painful thing for Jeremy? Not the money, not the loans. He realized that you never loved him, that all those years you were just waiting for the moment when you could seize our fortune. Now that's a lie. He told me about your conversations, how you convinced him to modernize the business, sell antiques, open a chain of cheap furniture stores. You only saw our business as a source of quick profits. I walked back to the chair but didn't sit down, continuing to stand by the fireplace. You know what Jeremy said to me the last time we talked about you? He said, Dad, I married a beautiful woman and woke up with a stranger. Enough. Valerie's voice shook with anger, and I think with tears. You poisoned his life, turned him against me. You're the one who ruined our marriage. I didn't destroy your marriage, Valerie. Your greed did. Your inability to love anything but money. She was silent for a few seconds, and I could hear her breathing heavily. Walter? Her voice became different, almost pleading. We can fix this. We can find a compromise. I'm willing to pay back the money I spent. I'm ready to work for the company, to learn. It's too late, I interrupted. The decision has been made and implemented. The company is now owned by a charitable foundation and will help young artists and craftsmen. That's what Jeremy would have wanted. But I'm his wife. I have rights. You're the widow of a man who died nearly bankrupt because of debts you put him into. You have a right to those debts. Congratulations. Valerie spoke quickly, nervously again. I'll sue. I'll find a way to challenge this transfer. I'll prove it's a fraud. Valerie, I said patiently, as one would explain to a child, you can sue anywhere. The paperwork is impeccable. The best lawyers in the state worked on it for 6 months. And you don't even have money for a good lawyer. I have a house, which is mortgaged against your loans. As soon as you can't make the payments, the bank's going to foreclose. I'm guessing that'll happen in a month or two, at the most. I heard her sobbing. It was the first time Valerie had ever cried in my presence. She was usually able to control her emotions, especially when it could hurt her plans. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you hate me so much? I don't hate you, Valerie. Hate requires strong feelings, and you're not worth it. I was just protecting what was important to my family. Jeremy was my family too. No. Jeremy was your ticket to riches. There's a fundamental difference. She was silent again. When she spoke, her voice sounded tired. What do I do, Walter? Get a job. Pay off my debts. Live like a normal person, not like a parasite who feeds on other people's labor. What if I can't pay my loans? Then you declare bankruptcy and start your life over. Some people benefit from that. Maybe you'll finally understand the value of honest labor. Valerie sighed heavily. Did Jeremy really know about the loans? Of course he did. The bank sent him a delinquency notice for one of them. He came to me in a state of confusion, thinking there had been a mistake. We sorted it out pretty quickly. What did he say? Nothing at first. He sat in my office for half an hour, just silent. Then he said, Dad, what should I do? I said, whatever you think is right. And he decided to disinherit me? He decided to protect the family business from the man who would destroy it. Those are different things, Valerie. She was quiet for a while longer. Walter, I don't even have money for a lawyer. If I'm really left with nothing. You'll find a way to survive. You're a smart woman when it comes to self-interest. Find a way to put that talent to honest work. Do you really think I deserve this kind of punishment? I think you're getting exactly what you deserve. No more, no less. Valerie sobbed again. I have nowhere to go, Walter. If I lose my house, that's not my problem anymore. When you stole from my son, you didn't think about the consequences. Now it's time to face them. One last question, she said quietly. Jeremy, did he forgive me before he died? I was silent for a long time, pondering the answer. Finally, I said, he loved you to the end, Valerie. But to forgive a betrayal and to love a betrayer are different things. The connection was cut. Valerie hung up, probably realizing that the conversation was over. I put the phone on the table next to my chair and looked at the fire in the fireplace. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel good. My son is dead, and his widow has learned a lesson she'll remember for the rest of her life. But that lesson wouldn't bring Jeremy back or heal the pain she'd caused our family. I picked up the book and tried to get back to reading. Tomorrow would start a new day, and I had business to attend to at the charity. Business that Jeremy would approve of. That evening, I sat in my office sorting through the paperwork of the Heritage Arts Charitable Foundation. In front of me lay applications from young master cabinet makers from various states asking for support to develop traditional crafts. It was for the sake of such people that I created this fund, so that ancient woodworking techniques would not disappear in a world of plastic furniture and disposable items. The phone rang again around 8 in the evening. I expected a second call from Valerie. She usually didn't give up after one conversation. But this time her voice sounded different. Not hysterical and aggressive, but tired and confused. Walter, I've been trying to figure out all day how this happened. How did you find out about those loans? I put the pen away and leaned back in my chair. Jeremy got a letter from the bank, a late payment notice on a personal loan for $150,000. He came to me completely bewildered, thinking there had been a bank error. When was this? About 7 months ago, February. I remember exactly because we were supposed to meet with a supplier from Tuscany that day, but Jeremy was so upset he couldn't concentrate on work. I stood up and walked over to the window. Behind the glass, the bare branches of the oak swayed in the light of the street lamps, the same trees that had grown here when I'd bought the house 30 years ago. At first, we really thought it was a mistake, I continued. But when Jeremy contacted the bank, it turned out that the loan was completely legitimate, with his signature, with all the necessary documents. And what did he do? He asked for a full statement of all the loans in his name. Turns out there were 3. The total amount was about $700,000, all made within the previous 2 years. Valerie was silent, and I could only hear her heavy breathing. You know what struck Jeremy the most, Valerie? Not the amount of money owed, not the fact that it was stolen. He was struck by how skillful you were at it, forging his signature, using his documents, filling out loan applications. It all took planning and patience. Walter. No, let me finish. Jeremy sat in this office and showed me bank statements. It turned out that the money was spent on your purchases. Designer dresses, jewelry, beauty treatments, trips to spas. Not a single dollar was spent on family needs or general purposes. I went back to the table and picked up one of Jeremy's photos, the one taken on his 30th birthday, before I'd met Valerie. A young, open face, a genuine smile. I remember him asking me then, Dad, how could I not see that? How did she keep such a big spending spree from me? And I answered him honestly, because you trusted your wife and didn't watch her every move. Jeremy never said anything to me, Valerie said quietly. Of course he didn't. Do you know why? Because he was hoping you'd come clean. He waited a whole month for it. Every day he came home and waited for you to say something like, Jeremy, there's something I need to tell you. But I didn't know he'd discovered the credits. Exactly. You didn't know and you kept pretending you were a loving wife, and he looked at you every day and realized he was living with a stranger. I was quiet, giving her time to digest this information. In March, Jeremy came to me and said, Dad, I want a divorce. But a week later, he changed his mind. Do you know why? Why? Because you threw him a romantic dinner for your anniversary, with candles, expensive wine, declarations of love, and he believed that maybe there was still something between you two. I set the photo aside and rubbed my tired eyes. But then, in April, the delinquency notice came for the second loan, and Jeremy realized that you hadn't stopped stealing, that even after the first loan was discovered, you were still taking money under his name. I didn't think. You didn't. You weren't thinking. You just took what you wanted without thinking about the consequences, like a kid in a candy store. Valerie sobbed, but I went on. After the second loan, Jeremy changed. He stopped telling me about your relationship, stopped inviting me to his house, but I could see how he suffered. The agony between loving you and realizing that you had betrayed him. If he suffered so much, why didn't he talk to me? Would you have confessed? If he'd asked you directly? Valerie, did you make the loans in my name? What would you say? A long pause. I don't know, she finally admitted. Exactly. Jeremy knew it too. He knew you'd deny it, resent it, accuse him of mistrust, and he didn't want to endure another lie from the man he loved. I stood up and walked around the office, stopping by the bookshelf where the art history albums stood, the same ones Jeremy and I had studied together when he was a teenager. In May, we began working on a plan to transfer the assets to a charitable foundation. Jeremy said to me, Dad, I don't want our family business to go to someone who doesn't appreciate it. And I agreed with him. But he was still married to me. If he despised me so much, why didn't he divorce me? Because he loved you, Valerie. In spite of everything, he still loved the woman he married. He just realized that woman no longer existed. Valerie was crying openly now, not trying to hide her tears. In the last months before his death, Jeremy often came to see me in the evenings, I continued. We'd sit in this office, drinking whiskey and barely talking. Just sat there. Sometimes he'd say something like, Dad, I'm so tired of pretending everything's okay. Was he suffering because of me? He suffered because he realized that the person he loved most in the world after me never really loved him, that he was only a means to an end for you. That's not true. I loved Jeremy. No, Valerie. You loved what he could give you. The house, the car, the money, the status. If Jeremy had worked as, say, a teacher or a mechanic, you wouldn't have even looked at him. She stopped talking, and I knew I'd hit my mark. You know what Jeremy told me the week before he died? We were discussing the final details of the company's transfer to the foundation, and he suddenly said, Dad, I understand now why Mom never remarried after you died. She said it was better to be alone than with someone who didn't love you. What does that have to do with your wife? Because she understood the difference between love and calculation. Jeremy realized it too late. Valerie was crying quietly, and I felt a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction. Pity for a woman who'd lost everything because of her own greed, and satisfaction that justice had finally been served. Walter, she said at last, if I had confessed everything to him in February, if I had apologized, would it have made any difference? I pondered the answer for a long time. I don't know, Valerie. Jeremy was a kind man. Maybe he would have forgiven you. But trust is a lot harder to rebuild than money. Is it too late to make a change now? It's too late. Jeremy's dead. The foundation owns the company, and you got exactly what you deserved for years of deceit. She cried into the phone some more. What am I supposed to do now, Walter? Live, Valerie. Learn to live honestly. It may be harder than you think, but it might be more interesting. We've been disconnected. I hung up the phone and went back to the foundation's files. On the table were plans for a scholarship program for young craftsmen, projects to restore old workshops, and grant applications to preserve traditional techniques. Jeremy would be pleased that his inheritance would go toward this, and I was sure that wherever he was now, he would approve of my choice. In the morning, I woke up feeling like the weight that had been weighing on me for the past few months was finally getting lighter. The sun was streaming through the bedroom windows, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling peace. Valerie knew the truth. Justice had been served. Now I could focus on what this was all about. After breakfast, I went to the office of the Legacy of Art Charitable Foundation, which was located in a small building in historic downtown St. Cloud. Jeremy and I had chosen this location, specifically a 19th century old mansion, restored in a historic way. The building itself was meant to symbolize the foundation's mission, to preserve and pass on craftsmanship to future generations. My assistant Robert Hansen was already waiting for me in my office with folders of documents and a cup of freshly brewed coffee. Robert had worked with me for 15 years, first in the antiques business and now helping to manage the foundation. A reliable, honest man who shared my principles and understood the importance of our work. "Good morning, Mr. Crosby," he greeted me. "We've had a pretty busy day today. 6 new scholarship applications have come in, and we need to review the budget for the Vintage Workshop Restoration Program." I sat down at the table and picked up the first folder. In it was an application from a 23-year-old guy from Ohio who was studying traditional fiddle-making techniques. His grandfather had been a master violin maker, but had died before he could pass on all the secrets of the craft. Now the young man was trying to recover his lost knowledge and asked for support to study with the last old-school masters in Europe. "Interesting application," I said, flipping through the pages. "Traditional violin craftsmanship is indeed endangered." "Yes, and this young man has a good chance of becoming a true master," Robert agreed. I checked his references. All the teachers are very enthusiastic about him. We worked for about an hour, discussing applications and planning the foundation's activities for the coming months. It was exactly the kind of work that gave me satisfaction, helping young people who were striving to keep the tradition of excellence alive. Each scholarship approved meant that ancient techniques would not disappear, that future generations would be able to touch true art. Around 11 in the morning, my attorney Richard Stone called. "Walter, I need to update you on some developments. Your son's widow has filed a lawsuit challenging the transfer of assets to a charitable foundation." I put the papers aside and leaned back in my chair. "Expected. On what grounds?" "She claims that her son was coerced into signing the documents under duress, that the transfer of assets was made to deprive her of her rightful inheritance, and that the entire transaction was a fraudulent scheme. These are serious allegations." "Does she have proof?" "So far, only the testimony of 2 witnesses, her friends, who claim that Jeremy complained to them about pressure from his father. But this testimony is rather superficial and lacks specific facts." I wasn't surprised. Valerie always had a knack for finding people willing to support her version of events, especially if it didn't require much effort on their part. "Richard, how serious is this threat?" "Minimal. We have all the documentation to prove your son's decisions were voluntary, including his handwritten notes and correspondence with lawyers. Furthermore, the timeline works in our favor. The reorganization took place over several months, which rules out coercion." "Good. Do whatever is necessary to protect the foundation." After talking to the lawyer, I went back to work, but my concentration was broken. Valerie, as expected, wasn't going down without a fight. She was looking for ways to get back what she thought was hers, not realizing she never owned it. At lunchtime, I drove to a warehouse where items from a collection of antique furniture were stored. This collection now belonged to a foundation, and I planned to organize an exhibition for young craftsmen. Let them see samples of real craftsmanship, understand what to strive for in their work. The warehouse was located in the industrial zone of the city, in a specially equipped building with climate control. Hundreds of items were stored here. Tables and chairs of the 18th century, chests of drawers and cabinets by French and Italian masters, rare examples of English furniture. Each piece was a work of art, crafted by people who had given their lives to their craft. I walked slowly between the rows, stopping at particularly valuable pieces. Here was a gilded Venetian armchair that Jeremy and I had found in a little shop in Padua 10 years ago. And here was a French desk by Master Louis, every inch of which was adorned with the finest inlay. Each piece held a story, the story of the craftsman who made it, the family who owned it, the era it had lived through. Valerie saw in these things only the price on the auction tag. I saw the connection of generations, the continuity of craftsmanship, the beauty that survives the ages. The phone rang as I was looking at an antique Italian cabinet with stunning wood carvings. It was Robert calling. "Mr. Crosby, Mrs. Crosby just came in. Your son's widow. She wanted to talk to you, but when she found out you weren't here, she demanded to see the foundation's records." "And what did you tell her?" "That the foundation's records are only available upon official request through the attorneys. She got very angry and said she'd be back. Okay, if she shows up again, call security. She has no right to information about the foundation's activities. I finished looking at the collection and went back to the office. I spent the rest of the day working on a plan for an educational program for young artisans. We plan to invite the best restoration specialists from Europe to share their knowledge with American students. That evening at home, I received another call from Richard Stone. Walter, there's an update on your sister-in-law's lawsuit. She's hired an attorney, one Marcus Gray. Not the most expensive lawyer in town, but he's pretty pushy. What's he asking for? A complete revocation of the transfer to the foundation and the return of all assets to the estate, plus $2 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress. I laughed. $2 million for moral damages? I wonder how she justifies it. She claims that her father-in-law's actions caused her severe psychological suffering and undermined her health. Richard, how long can this trial take? With our evidence, no more than 3 to 4 months. Maybe less if the judge is quick to understand the situation. After talking to the lawyer, I sat in my favorite chair with a glass of wine and thought about how quickly life changes. Just a month ago, Valerie was sure she would be a wealthy heiress. Now she was suing for the right to an estate that never belonged to her. But the most important thing was that Jeremy's cause lives on. The foundation would help young artisans, keep the tradition alive, and preserve beauty for future generations. That's the legacy that really matters. I opened the folder of new applications I'd brought home for the evening study. A young woman from California was studying the art of porcelain painting. A guy from Texas was reconstructing wrought iron techniques. A girl from New York was learning the ancient methods of bookbinding. Each application is a hope that the beautiful will not disappear from the world, that beauty and craftsmanship will find their place in the future. It was worth going through all the difficulties with Valerie, all the conflicts and disappointments for that. Jeremy understood this. In the last months of his life, he often said to me, "Dad, it's good that our business will help people create beautiful things. That's more important than money." He was right. And now his dream is becoming a reality. It's been 4 months since Jeremy's death. It was a beautiful fall in St. Cloud, with the golden maples along the streets, shimmering in the sun, and the air fresh and clear. I was sitting in my office reviewing the foundation's first quarter report. The numbers were pleasing. 23 scholarships for young craftsmen, 8 workshops restored, 3 educational programs in different states. Outside the window, a real estate company car drove by, stopping in front of Jeremy and Valerie's house. The third in a week. Valerie's house had been on the market for 2 months, but buyers weren't in a hurry. It was overpriced. She was trying to get as much as she could to cover her debts and keep something for herself. My attorney, Richard Stone, called around noon with the expected news. "Walter, the court has entered a final judgment on your sister-in-law's claim, a dismissal on all counts. In addition, she's been awarded court costs in the amount of $25,000. Did the judge give a reason for his decision? In detail. He noted that all the documents on the transfer of assets to the foundation are impeccable. The time frame excludes the version of coercion, and the testimony of witnesses contradictory and unconvincing. In addition, the judge pointed out that the plaintiff had failed to prove any of her allegations. I put my pen aside and looked out the window at the house across the street. What about Valerie's credit obligations? The banks had started foreclosure proceedings. If the house doesn't sell in the next 2 weeks, they'll put it up for auction. After talking to my lawyer, I decided to take a walk. I had been taking daily walks in the neighborhood for months now. The doctor said it was good for my age, and the fresh air helped me think. I walked the quiet streets of the neighborhood I'd lived in for 30 years and thought about how life had changed. Jeremy is no longer with me, but his business is alive and well. Last week, we approved a scholarship for a young craftsman from Michigan who is studying traditional furniture, making techniques from the American colonies. His work reminded me of Jeremy's early pieces when my son was just learning the craft. As I walked past the Main Street Cafe, I saw Valerie. She was sitting alone at a table by the window with a cup of coffee and some papers in front of her. She didn't look the same as she had 6 months ago. Expensive outfits had been replaced by plain clothes, flawless makeup by a pale, tired face. She seemed older than her 34 years. Our eyes met through the glass. Valerie stared at me for a few seconds, then turned away, gathered her papers, and quickly left the cafe through the back exit. She had avoided seeing me since the court dismissed her lawsuit. That evening, I was working in my office when the phone rang. It was Michelle, a friend of Valerie's whom I knew from family events, calling. "Mr. Crosby, sorry to bother you." The voice sounded uncertain. "I'm calling about Valerie." "Go ahead." She's in a very difficult situation. The house is going up for auction tomorrow and there's hardly any money left. I'm trying to help her, but Michelle, why are you telling me this? I was thinking that maybe you could, help her in some way, in memory of Jeremy. I was silent for a long time, looking at the picture of my son on the table. Michelle, Valerie got exactly what she deserved. No more, no less. But she was your son's wife, wasn't she? She was the person who stole from my son, cheated him, took advantage of his trust. Her predicament is a natural consequence of her own actions. Mr. Crosby, I understand that you have reasons to be angry with Valerie, but I'm not angry, Michelle. Anger requires emotion, and Valerie is not worth it. I just don't see any reason to help the man who ruined my son's life. The connection's been severed. Michelle apparently realized that further conversation was pointless. The next day I went to the foundation's office early in the morning. We were scheduled to meet with a group of young masters from different states, the first face-to-face meeting of the foundation's fellows. It was an important event that Jeremy had been planning since he was alive. 20 people gathered in the conference room. Woodcarvers, ceramicists, glass blowers, and metalworkers. Young people between the ages of 20 and 35, united by a love of traditional crafts and a desire to preserve them for future generations. I stood in front of them and saw in their eyes the same light that had once burned in Jeremy's eyes. A passion for craftsmanship, a desire to create beautiful and lasting things, and a respect for the traditions of their ancestors. Each of you has received support from the foundation, not just as a talented craftsman, I told them, but as a guardian of traditions that could disappear without your involvement. The money you receive is the legacy of a man who believed in the importance of beauty and quality. After the meeting, I had lunch with several fellows at a restaurant nearby. A young woman from Oregon who was studying traditional weaving techniques was talking about her plans to open a workshop to teach children forgotten crafts. "Mr. Crosby," she said, "I want children to understand the difference between things made by hands with love and mass production. It can change the way they view the world. It is for conversations like this, for people like this, that the foundation was created." Returning home in the evening, I drove past Valerie's house. There were cars from the auction house and several potential buyers. The house was being sold for debt, and Valerie would likely not realize anything beyond the amount needed to pay off the loans. At home, I sat in my favorite chair with a glass of wine and opened a letter from one of the scholarship recipients, a young craftsman from Wisconsin who was studying traditional methods of making musical instruments. He wrote that thanks to the foundation's support, he had been able to spend a month in Germany studying the work of the last masters who possessed the secrets of making authentic Baroque lutes. "Mr. Crosby," he wrote, "I realize that I have received more than just tuition money. I received the opportunity to touch living history, to become part of a chain of masters that stretches back through the centuries. Thank you and your son's memory for this opportunity." I set the letter aside and looked at Jeremy's portrait. My son would be pleased with how his legacy was progressing. The money Valerie had planned to spend on luxuries and pleasures was now helping to preserve beauty for future generations. At 10 p.m., Robert called with news of the sale of Valerie's house. "Mr. Crosby, the house sold at auction for $650,000. After paying off all the debts, Mrs. Crosby has about $15,000 left. $15,000 instead of the $8.5 million she had in mind. A harsh but fair lesson. Did she attend the auction? No. They say she left town last week. Neighbors saw her loading her stuff into a small truck. Valerie disappeared from St. Cloud as suddenly as she appeared in Jeremy's life. Perhaps it was for the best for everyone." I closed my eyes and thought about how justice sometimes prevails, though not always quickly. Jeremy is no longer with me, but his memory lives on in every young craftsman who receives support from the foundation. His money helps keep traditions alive, create beauty, and pass on knowledge. And somewhere far away from St. Cloud, a woman who once dreamed of easy wealth is starting a new life with $15,000 and the weight of bitter experience. Perhaps this experience will teach her to appreciate what is truly important in life. Although, knowing Valerie, I doubted it.